Sorry that I'm not at school today. This wasn't a planned absence. So hopefully all the technology works and you're going to be able to get done everything that you would have gotten done if I was there. And this video is going to help you sort of preview the two activities you're going to do today and go over your reading from last night. So all is good in the world. All right, so really quick announcements. Tomorrow, for tonight, you're going to read 842 to 849 in McKay, which is pretty exciting because we're starting the Russian Revolution, which means we're getting close to the end of World War I already. Last night, you read about the experience of war on the home front, which is an important topic, so we might kind of recap that first thing tomorrow as well. But keep watching this video because it'll introduce you to that topic and the two activities that you're going to do right after. All right, so let's get into it. Little recap of our timeline of World War I, just so you see where we're at and why. All right, so we started in 1871. We're working our way through the war, and we actually got into the war yesterday, or the experience of wartime because of changing war tactics. So we might broadly break down this timeline into our long-term causes, which go back to the Franco-Prussian War. I know you probably have been exposed to this acronym before in world history or maybe even junior high, but it's not a bad one to remember now that we're sort of just reviewing the four main causes of the war: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And hopefully now that you've covered the long-term causes of the war, you can see how all of those are taking shape after 1871. In 1890, when Bismarck is fired, it brings us into a new stage we might call short-term causes, because the role of Germany in diplomacy really changes after Bismarck is taken out of the picture, and Germany is increasingly seen as an aggressive power. And of course, to Germany, all the other powers seem super aggressive. They're all forming these alliances that are surrounding Germany. The war began with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, and we saw how that went from a regional conflict to a continental conflict because of those alliances, to a global conflict because of imperialism, essentially. And it sparks that July crisis. That is what we call that chain reaction where all the powers are pulled in, leading up to actual mobilization with the Schlieffen Plan. We know we need to get to the end of the war, especially 1917, when that stalemate ends. And that's going to begin with your reading tonight on the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution is a key turning point that does a lot of damage for the Allied powers, but more on that tomorrow. Yesterday, we focused on why the war became a stalemate. Remember, a stalemate is when no one side of the war is gaining much of a tactical advantage over the other. And because of the trench warfare and the new weapons that came out of trench warfare, like chemical warfare, casualties became very, very high, and it more or less becomes a war of attrition, where the goal is to get your enemy to surrender instead of continuously conquering territory until you capture their capital city. So this is still the point of the war that we're focusing on today, and specifically the effects of total war on society, especially the people at home as opposed to the soldiers in the war. We know their experiences were really awful, but this greatly changes the role of women in society, the role of government in society. So we might define total war as a war in which the whole society is completely mobilized to serve the war front. Normal government and civilian functions are suspended to contribute to the war effort. So everybody, whether they're soldiers or civilians, are part of winning this war. And everything on the home front, especially the economy and laborers, are being retooled to produce materials that go to the war front to fight this war of attrition. So this often looks like government planning the economy with these economic planning boards that do the following. They ration supplies on the home front, especially food and materials that can go to feeding soldiers and supplying soldiers with what they need to survive. It also means price and wage control. So this is true government economic planning. And it even went so far as to create restrictions on worker movement. They could not leave work. They could not leave the city. This is how badly governments were depending on workers on the home front in order to win this war on the war front. So a specific example that you read about last night is the German War Raw Materials Board. And every country in the war had something similar to this. It was basically a new I wouldn't call it a branch of government, but an organization within the government that created the centrally planned economy so that they could retool everything to better win the war. The first thing that you're going to do today after this video on page 18 is do a little bit of hat practice using World War I propaganda as a resource. So you're going to analyze the audience, which is pretty obvious here, of these two pieces of propaganda, and what the message it's sending in terms of how they're going to win the war. But wartime propaganda does change over time between 1914 and 1917 as the stalemate was dragging on, especially after some really, really high casualty battles like Verdun and Somme. Propaganda changes and it becomes a lot more brutal. We still have propaganda that focuses on the role of women in particular on the home front, since so many men were being shipped off to war. So they really needed to keep women invested in winning the war. And as war dragged on, fewer of their sons, husbands, uncles were coming home, or they were coming home really wounded or with PTSD. But it was really important to keep women mentally in the war. And the role of propaganda over time becomes really to manipulate how people feel about wartime experience. Remember that they thought the war in 1914 was going to be really short. So people start to feel confused and a little dismayed as things drag on and casualty rates get so high. So propaganda gets a lot more dark over time, and it becomes about manipulating people's emotions to remind them that the enemy that they're fighting is a brutal force, and it tries to villainize and demonize those enemies to remind people that they need to keep up their efforts on the home front in order to win the war on the war front. So if we're going to go back to this timeline, I think there's another date we should add, and that's 1916. 1916 was the year where total war and stalemate started to get so frustrating that initial positive feelings about the war effort just started to break. People started to lose it and not want anything to do with this war anymore. All the propaganda efforts of the government weren't cutting it. Government was going so far as to censor and control the media so people couldn't even hear the bad news about the war front. Letters being sent home from soldiers were being read and censored so that people didn't know how bad things were. But of course, when your family members aren't coming home, you can put two and two together. So as an indicator of how bad things started to go, many countries did what Germany did with these auxiliary service laws that basically legally required all people to work and to contribute to the war effort. So this is a really totalitarian control over society. And you know that we're heading towards World War II, where totalitarianism becomes the norm in some places, even when it's not wartime. So what you're going to do next is you're going to start analyzing the way feelings changed about the war over time. So here's a picture of those crowds of 1914. People are pumped. And in Germany, they called this sentiment Bürgerfrieden. It was the declaration of a civil peace, that all people across classes, genders, cultures were going to come together in a totally unified nation, the ultimate nationalism, to support the war effort. And Germany went so far as to put a name on this. We declare Bürgerfrieden. But between 1914 and 1916, especially into 1917, civil peace falls apart and workers start to strike. There are mutinies across Europe. People are surviving off of black markets where there's really high inflation. Nationalism starts to bubble up again in very, very violent ways. For example, in Ireland with the Easter Rebellion. And class warfare resumes. There becomes a big resentment for the conservatives in power that are often associated with aristocracy or industrial wealth. The feeling that these individuals are purposely dragging on the war so they can make money at the expense of workers and, of course, at the expense of soldiers' lives. And this gives a lot of credence to the socialist and Marxist message that they're being exploited. So in 1916, all those divisions that war was supposed to resolve in society come out. Now, of course, there are some benefits of full employment, the empowerment of labor unions, but all those things actually just lead to more strain on society in 1916. Workers are really empowered, and they start to just simply walk off the job, which is not good for the war effort at all. Tonight, you're going to see the particular repercussions of that in Russia. Okay, so you're ready for your 2 tasks. Like I said, one was the warm-up on page 18, but when you're done with that, you're going to turn to pages 9 and 10 and work with a document set about this concept called Bergfrieden. And the prompt is describe and analyze changing views towards the concept of civil peace, Bergfrieden, in Germany between 1914 and 1918. So hopefully after watching this video, you really get a sense of what's going to happen to this concept. But your first step, just like we did with the African imperialism DBQ, is we're going to slow down and just practice happing. Don't read the documents yet. You've got this chart that tells you the source information. You're just going to analyze that source information, do a mini brainstorm, what's happable about that source, and then make a prediction, anticipate how is that going to influence views towards Bergfrieden. Once you're done with the first 2 columns, then actually go on to reading the sources 3 and 4. What does it actually say about this view towards civil peace, and what is actually happable about it? I think that'll probably take you the rest of class, but if you do finish early, of course, get started on McKay, and I will see you in class tomorrow. All right, thanks guys for your hard work.